to our main topic of this evening, and it's skills. Our favourite skills, how we use them, how different systems sort of cope with them, and apply them in various ways. So to kick us off, Dan, do you want to lead us into this topic?
We've got skills to pay the bills. You will be pleased because the reason we started streaming late was because I was having technical issues and thought I was going to have to go analog rather than digital for a lot of this stuff. So I have piles of RPG books around me, all open to the different skills pages for different systems, so we can talk about them. But yeah, skills are they're a particular thing in role-playing games. They've been around since I want to say that they were in classic D&D. I don't know exactly enough about. It's been so many years since I played AD&D to say if they're.
They were maybe not in the fact that in the form that they are now, but there's always been this idea that as a character you will have skills in something. You know what I mean? So and it's evolved from there. So yeah,
and they're usually called that. So when we're talking about things that are stuff that your character can do that aren't necessarily special powers. So they're not attacks, they're not spells, they're not feats, which have become a thing sort of since 3rd edition, which is just kind of special abilities that are their own unique things. But stuff your character is generally good at. And they crop up in... they're in most systems. So they're in 5e, they're in Pathfinder 1st and 2nd edition, they're in Starfinder. I tell you what's fun. They're in Woofrup. I've got that one here as well. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I thought it'd be fun to see how they did skills back in then, and I can tell you, it's fun.
Yeah.
And they are of, if you're a GM, the way you handle them in game affects your game an awful lot, because they require creativity both from players and GMs about how you use them, how much you allow your players to implement them, what do they allow, because they often don't specifically say what you can do with them. Some systems do are more crunchy on it. You go as far as sort of Pathfinder 2nd edition, where you have the entire skill feat system, where you have feats that are tied to your skills, and the training system, over to something like 5e that I was surprised to find. 5e, there isn't even a chapter for skills in the player's handbook. I tried to look up in the index and couldn't find it. I had to leaf through the book until I found the one paragraph about skills, which basically was like, these exist, you might need to roll on them sometime. Your GM will tell you what to do. And that's it. which is kind of fine. I assume that I confess I've never opened my Dungeon Master's Guide. I bought it when we did the special, and then I actually have never looked in it. But I assume there is a chapter on how you actually GM skills in the game there. But the player's version is a lot more simple, and the number of skills varies greatly depending on system. From I think I've counted in World of Darkness. There you go. They've got about 30 skills in World of Darkness.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, Stu's chipped in, getting his head around the 2D20 system, which both simplifies skills and complicates it at the same time.
Ooh, what uses the 2D20 system?
I don't know.
System?
Is it the Star Trek
thing?
Role-playing? Yes, I did play Call of Cthulhu, and that also used the D100.
Oh yeah,
I think, because that's you get successes and failures based on a percentage of 100. So and you can get a critical success. Star Trek Adventures, I thought it would be. Stu is very, very keen on Star Trek and Star Trek Adventures. In fact, I believe some of the Foxton community are playing that with him, which I'm very excited about.
Exciting.
I know they didn't invite me, but I'd already said they'll probably chip in and be the resident Q or Khan, just every now and then, just coming in. That'd be so good, so good. So, and Chris can also confirm there is no skill section in the 5e DMG. Wow. Just ask your GM. He'll know. They'll just know.
Yeah, which is quite a 5e thing, isn't it? It's just ask the DM.
Yeah.
It's one thing I confess, I've never had a problem with skills in 5e, because I think most people who play 5e, certainly in the last year, are using D&D Beyond, and that just tells you what your skills are and gives you a button to click to roll on them, so you don't really need to know kind of how they work for it. Would you like to know, before we kind of dive into our favorite, systems we like, systems we don't, skills we like, things like that, would you like to know how many skills there are in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay?
Yes, I do.
Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. This is, I think, first edition. It is. Let's find out when it was published. This particular one is published in. See, this is 1995, but I'm sure that's a reprint. I think it's from before. I think it's probably in the 80s.
Must have been something. Yeah.
So this version of it has 133 skills you can choose for your character.
Wow.
They contain things like blather,
Good.
brewing, concealment rural, and concealment urban. So different concealments depending on your
Oh my
your
god!
thing.
This is basically describing Ross. It's amazing.
There's one that just says "flee!" exclamation mark.
Ross. Yeah.
There's,
Like a
oh
game
my
for me.
goodness. Night vision, river lore. There's no other lore, but as far as I can tell, just river lore. So, there's rune lore, runes and rivers you can know about.
Does it do something useful like put them in alphabetical order?
Yeah, they are in order.
Oh, they're in order. Oh, good. Because that's always great when schoolbooks decide to go like, we're going to put these in alphabetical order, even though that means that nothing is together. It's all just be scattered to the four winds.
One of them is just called Very Strong.
Very strong.
I think this is because there's no feat system in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, so all of those special abilities and character customization goes through skills.
And how would that?
I think it's delightful.
Yeah, that is absolutely delightful, and obviously a pre-runner because now we've got a set load of skills that's condensed into. So what would you do? You have that skill, and then you could say to your DM, "I'd like to use my flee skill," but if you didn't have the flee skill, then you couldn't. You just had to stay and fight. That was it. Yeah, Paul says they always seem like an afterthought. It can be sometimes. You're like, did you really think about this?
I would, for the record, I would love to play a game of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay on a stream or something at some point. I know it would take me a week to learn. Like, this book's as big as the Pathfinder core book.
Huge.
It's so complicated.
It's true.
But it would be so funny to play something like that. Flee. Characters with this skill are fit and agile runners. They may add 50% to their move characteristic when running away.
Wow. I mean, it's quite nice. I imagine that it is a bit cumbersome, but you could create some very interesting characters by basically just picking the skills you want them to have and then kind of building, because we spoke about character creation about a month or so ago. That could be a valid way you do this in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. But like, he's got to run away, and they've got to be able to hide, and they need to do magic and this, and then just construct a character around them. I mean, speaking of flicking feverishly through rulebooks, Ross, you've been flicking through there. What have you got in your hands?
I've got AD&D second edition.
AD&D
nice.
second edition, a classic.
Candice got me. She had it's the player's handbook. It's not the actual. And I found proficiencies, but haven't found any skills. And I don't know if they used to be called proficiencies rather than skills. They might have done, because a lot of these are weirdly skill sounding. So there's agriculture, animal handling, animal training, artistic ability, blacksmithing, brewing, carpentry, cobbling, cooking, dancing.
It's a lot of flavour stuff there, isn't it? There's not really, because it's the number of times I've rolled a character is like, they are skilled in blacksmithing, and I've done no blacksmithing at all throughout my whole adventure. It's just something that I used to do. Thank you, Chris, for our resident sort of like, you are a font of all knowledge and a true gentleman. I loved my little toast video you made for me yesterday, and he said that there's 47 skills in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition.
Wow.
So is that
still quite a lot?
There's still quite a lot, but did you say there was 100 and some odd?
133 in the first edition,
right.
So they're getting there.
So clearly they must have looked at that, and the player feedback maybe. What do you reckon, given the time scale? What do you reckon the sort of like, what had they read? What had come out that they've gone, oh, we need to change this? Was it D&D 3.5 or what would it have been?
So it wouldn't be 3.5. I think 3rd edition is around 2000. I think it's the millennium that comes out.
Right.
So they're pre that. They're still in kind of 2nd edition D&D. So when 2nd edition, I'm not sure when 2nd edition Warhammer comes out. But it would be after, because 3rd edition reduces the number, is the first thing to have kind of skills and feats as we recognize them in modern games today.
Yeah.
That kind of really condenses it down. But even I have my third edition book here, not even 3.5 third edition.
Wow.
Which has, even that still got, I would say, far too many. You know, it's got a read lip skill. It's got an innuendo skill.
Amazing.
Which is just great. But it also has something.
I tell you what, I bet that one's a hard one. But hey, what? Sorry, darlings. Very interesting. Yeah, it's funny how things have changed. Stu says he's got a first edition D&D Player's Handbook.
Oh, Stu.
I used to have, I think it was Advanced D&D actually, the red box, you know, with the guy fighting the dragon on the front. Yeah. Oh, my goodness. That was an inscrutable. How many kids stopped playing D&D for years having tried to read that? I was one. That put me right off. Thank goodness things got better. Sorry, Danny, you were just explaining about some of the skills.
It kind of shows the progress of skill systems, and all of it is that you get a lot of skills that kind of double up, or skills that have to buddy with each other to work, which gradually get reduced down because they're effectively the same skill. In third edition and 3.5, you have separate hide and move silently skills. So it's possible for you to be very, very good at not being seen, but still be really loud. And you have separate, I think you have separate listen and, you have separate listen and spot skills that rather than perception. So, you can have good eyesight and bad hearing. So it's possible for you to be hidden from someone, but them still hear you, which is sort of interesting. Yeah. But also you can absolutely just do that with a stealth and a perception skill. Like those 4 skills needed to be 2 skills. So this kind of condensing of stuff happens. Throughout the one exception is kind of Pathfinder 3.5 to Pathfinder, where the knowledge skills come in, which kind of balloons that section a little bit, because first edition Pathfinder's got loads of different knowledges. Yes. Although 3.5 and third edition just has one that's like knowledge other.
Interesting.
So you kind of put whatever in.
It's a fascinating sort of thinking about the genealogy of this rather. Because obviously you can think of these guys sitting around the table. And being like, how can we come up with a system? Let's do a list of all the things that you could do, that you could be skilled at. Okay, great. Let's put them in, and then you can pick the ones you want, and we'll go from there. And of course, it's this sort of distillation from that rather cumbersome idea. And then over the years, I'm going, well, look, we could probably put that under this, and that probably, perception probably covers lip reading or doing this or doing something else. I mean, B Daddy, Varanasha comes in with AD&D had non-weapon proficiencies that were character specific, so they were used instead of skills. So Ross was pretty correct.
Oh, yeah. Nice,
interesting.
So, there's loads of random ones like agriculture and ancient history, animal handling, animal training, appraising, like all the generic ones. Blind fighting, which is cool. Astrology.
It'd be quite interesting to trace. I mean, I'm not suggesting anyone does this, and there's no criticism that you haven't done this. It'd be quite interesting to trace which skills have made it all the way through. If there are any skills like blind fighting or something, aside from the incredibly obvious ones, but any sort of little quite specific ones, they're like, no, we've always got to have mushroom sniffing. Because that's a key skill for any character. You've got to do that thing. So we've inspired Chris to dust off his Wfurp book again. He bought the rule book about 15 years ago, but I've never run it. Well, he did say, though, that Warhammer Fantasy Role-Playing, second edition, has 84 talents. So what was talents about? How do they differ from skills?
Talents, I don't know. They're not in first edition.
So that
I reckon they're probably a bit more like feats. I would say that sounds a bit more like that.
Or if there's 47 skills and 84 talents, and there were 130 odd skills in the first book, have they just reskinned them? Have they actually just taken a bunch of the skills and been like, these are talents now? Gwart says perception. I thought, perception, probably one that's gone through the whole way. Is it not?
Perception, no, even in third edition D&D, there are 3 perception skills. There's spot, listen, and search, based on what you're trying to do. The only one that I can find that I think has made it all the way through to I'd say both of the games that we kind of predominantly talk about on this show of 5th edition and Pathfinder 2nd edition. The only one I can see that's in all of them is Intimidate.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's a classic.
Potentially the knowledge skill, like there's knowledge arcana, knowledge religion, and knowledge nature, which kind of have versions in them. Like they change a bit, but they're sort of in there. But because even the diplomacy becomes persuasion in I think both versions of it. But Intimidate is still Intimidate all the way through. So shouting at people is one thing.
I guess, yes, because Intimidate's an interesting... It's a very specific shouting at somebody. Like, to intimidate someone is a specific thought action, if that makes sense. You know, you can shout and you can get angry and you can do things, but to actually set out to intimidate someone, and that's not necessarily shouting. It could be putting your hand menacingly on your sword, or it could be shouting at them, or it could be waggling a finger, or it could be saying something else, something really cold. And I guess it is quite a... you'd need a catch-all term for all of that stuff, and then presumably it's for the player to then fill in the blank afterwards by saying, I step forward and try and intimidate.
Well, it's an interesting one as Intimidate. If we want to start talking about specific skills, Intimidate's one that's always been interesting to me because it's traditionally tied to charisma. Like generally a skill has an ability that's attached to it that will give you a bonus when you're better at it. Generally, Intimidate is always a charisma-based skill. There are feats you can take in 1st edition Pathfinder that tie it to strength instead. And that brings up the sort of interesting thing where you can be a giant double axe wielding terrifying monster, but because you dumped charisma because you're a fighter, you can't be frightening. And it's one of these weird sort of things that's like you kind of need a good GM to just be like, no, just type, it's fine, just type strength on that particular one. But it's a weird one because it kind of mechanically, a lot of the mechanics are based off it being a charisma skill, which makes sense because of what you've said about like, you know, what the skill of intimidating somebody is. It is a force of personality.
Yes.
But it's interesting that it's a skill that feasibly could be tied to 2 different ability scores.
Absolutely. Even more, you could be wise and intimidating. You could be... Intimidation is that sort of almost cross sort of skills, really. I mean, you could use your physical size, so it could be constitution and all this kind of stuff. It's really interesting.
Well, that's very interesting in terms of that's what World of Darkness systems do, where you have a set of something like 12 different ability scores, which are kind of your physical characteristics, which are things like, you know, strength, dexterity, seduction, because 90s RPGs were garbage, and, you know, things like that. And then you have like skills, which are like driving cars, shooting guns, looking in holes, you know, things like that.
That is a skill. Ask any sewage worker, and that is a definite skill. Looking in holes.
And when you want to roll, on something, you pick one of each, and you combine the scores in them, and that's the number of dice you roll. So you roll like dexterity and firearms, or you might roll intelligence and stealth to plan a sneaky route, things like that, which is a lovely system. That works really, really nicely, but it does mean you have to roll fistfuls of dice.
Interesting, yeah. And I'm going to say that Chris has backed up my my wild but seemingly correct guess that Flea and Very Strong are under the talents list now. So I think that's going to be one. Now, Gwat has asked a very good question, and one that was cropping into certainly my mind. I'm sure that many other people's minds, but it's good to ask. He asks, what is the least used / useful skill? Now, I'm gonna chuck this to Ross. First of all, what's your feeling? And I'd quite like, I suppose, if you can give me first of all the DM's perspective, and then perhaps a player's perspective. So, what's the least useful skill from a DM's perspective?
Let me just get my 5e book.
I mean, we can. You can pick the system. I guess we'll use the current systems that we've got rather than just like Flea.
Yeah.
I tell you what, I'll probably. Chris has chipped in with animal handling, which I've used on occasion. For me, as a player, and bear in mind I've never DM'd a game to date. My least favourite skill, which is a bit of a bugbear because it sounds the most useful, is sleight of hand.
Yes.
I take it every time. You get points in it, and you never, ever, ever use it. I never use it. It never comes up. And the thing is, Gwot says a praise, which, you could maybe use that. It is kind of fairly useless unless that's actually what you do. But sleight of hand, man. I never use it. Never use it.
I find intimidation a little bit meh, because it depends. Because it I don't know. It does stat stuff instead of I don't know. Usually when I've never had an opportunity where I don't know that I've gone. I'm going to intimidate them, and then get them to drop their weapons, and then that never happens because obviously if you're in combat, it just gives them a minus to certain things. Do you know what I mean?
But at least it does something.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
That's the thing. I mean, all of these stuff, animal handling. I have used that in the past when I, have jumped on a horse and occasionally Dan or Ross would be like, "Give me an animal handling check." You're like, "Ooh, not used that in a while." Of course, Paul says quite rightly, pickpockets do. They do, but it's very specific. Very specific.
The problem with sleight of hand and pickpocket, actually, because it's the same in any computer RPG that has a pickpocket skill. You play Skyrim or anything like that. That's the one that doesn't get leveled. And the reason is because the penalty for failure is it's like snowboarding. If you want to take this as an example, learning to ski is great because you can ski awkwardly and just kind of look rubbish, but gradually learning it. You'll gradually get there. With snowboarding, there are two ways of doing it. You can be doing it right, or you can be dead. And that's kind of what it is with sleight of hand. There's no way to train it. If you've got 2 points in sleight of hand, you're not going to try and steal that guy's purse, because if you fail it, he sees you and you go to prison. And that's kind of, and it's such a massive penalty versus the reward for it. So you either have to kind of quietly just pump points into it for level after level, and then suddenly bust it out and try it, or you don't. What I really like is how it's been dealt with in second edition, where it's just thievery. You have one skill that covers disarming traps, stealing stuff from people, picking locks, all of that sneaky stuff that you might want to do. You can just bung it all in there. I would even argue that you could probably lump stealth in there as well. I prefer sort of slightly fewer skills where they're kind of mechanical, where there's stuff about doing things.
That is a very controversial view, because I disagree. I like stealth as a separate, because again, stealth is like intimidate. There is loads of different ways you can be stealthy. Let us know, Dangerlings. Let us know how you feel. I'm glad to see we've got some opinions coming up. Gwot says intimidate has a ton of feats tied to it, which is true. Entire builds or we designed around Intimidate, Pathfinder First Edition, but thievery is great. I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? Because I suppose that if you've grown to love a character that revolved around a particular skill, you will defend that vehemently and say but that character used it all the time. Maybe I'm just in the wrong because I haven't had a player who's used the sleight of hand. For me, it was always kind of like the gambler on a paddle boat steamer going down there in Carolina, like that sleight of hand going whoop, like used to be able to do on Red Dead 1 and just get an ace out. What do you think, Ross? What are your sort of thoughts? We got that.
I really like the way 5e have done it, and they've limited the amount of, similar to Pathfinder 2, both of them have limited down the amount of skills that you need to have a look at, and you can bunch different things together, and it's the DM's choice really as to obviously they say I want to do this, and then you go, okay, roll a blah 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 for me, and you can still do the thing where you argue that it may be a different skill and whether that DM agrees with you or not, but I really like the 5e version of skills for me.
So I've got an interesting question, and it's come from Paul, sort of on the back of something Paul said in the chat. Paul said, I found out it's how the DM actually plays the game. Each DM uses rules, how they view it. Now, obviously, it's looking like you're in favour, both of you in favour of stripping back the number of skills that are available and bunching them all under sort of more, not nebulous sort of qualities, but sort of more general terms. Is that from a DM's perspective, that's easier to run a game because it gives you more license? Or do you think that benefits players by making it a little bit more sort of free and easy?
I think it's both. It allows you to, as a DM, focus on the story, and it allows and it's easier for the player to pick up. They just have to ask a question. Oh, I want to do this, and you just tell them what skill it would be under. And if you're an experienced player, you can always like as I said, argue the case as to why it may be a different one. I think it just enables you to play the game more than like waiting around going, oh, what skill shall I use? Like, what skill? And I think that's always beneficial to just get into the meat of the game and the role play.
Fair enough. Yeah. And Dan, what's your sort of take on it?
I think kind of if you reduce the number of skills, you have to increase the amount of interpretation about how those skills can be used, which is broadly good. And I like I think the sweet spot is kind of where 5e and second edition are now. I think they've got a good number of ones in there now. The issue where you have kind of, just decide what this is and have someone roll on it. Is that it opens up things to debate, which can be interesting at a table, but can also be disruptive. Intimidate is a good example of that. Generally speaking, GMs and players have different ideas about how Intimidate works, because, like Ross was saying, it can be frustrating. You can't run in and shout at someone and they put down their weapon. And the reason you can't have that is that it's a game about sword fighting, and it's not a fun game if you can walk into the room, roll a dice, and the fight ends. So there's a mechanical reason why you can't just shout at everybody and they immediately surrender to you all the time. Also, because that's not how people work, and that's not how adrenaline works. And if someone runs at you and shouts, often you're not going to just, most people won't just drop their weapons and surrender. I would, I'm a coward. But, in a fantasy setting, this probably doesn't happen. The worst one, my least favorite skill of all time, actually, I think sleight of hand is the most useless. But the one that I really dislike, and it's getting there, it's getting better, but the one I really disliked in first edition is sense motive, because sense motive is just a horribly named skill that makes it sound to the player like they are Darren Brown, and they're not. It makes you sound a bit like, stealth doesn't make you invisible. Sense motive does not make you a mind reader. It's better I like it more in second edition with it being tied to perception, and it's about your perception skill, and you read small tells on people. And if you're very good at picking up on noticing things, you might notice a twitch or a tell or something that somebody has, which is interesting. I think insight in 5e it's good. It still has that implication of being like, I don't like there being a skill that you just constantly roll and be like, is your NPC lying to me? Tell me the plot. I don't like rolling it as a player, and I don't like having it rolled when I'm GMing. I find it's just like, I will signal to you if this is a lie. I will give you hints as your GM.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? I would definitely. Chris agrees. He actually said insight is a much better name in the chat, but you've sort of covered that. It goes under the category that I have of spank skills, where certain players will pick up on that and go, "I'm going to spank this mama to death. I'm just going to keep rocking it out all the time." Scott does it quite a lot. I've noticed. He's just sort of like sense motive on that. Sense motive on that. Sense motive on that net sentence. And you're like, maybe, because it does. And I don't think it's a player's fault, because like you say, there is that ambiguity in the name. And insight it does sound a bit Darren Brown. It sounds like, if I put points in this, I can read your mind. And who doesn't want to do that? That's a really useful skill, but it doesn't kind of mean that. It's interesting. Well, we're just going to, because I was going to say that we've had some really interesting focus on chats and stuff. As Chris makes the point, players like having high numbers in things, not having to split points into various skills helps that happen, which is very true, very true. Usher says, as a player, I don't want to have to pay attention to 35 skills I need to come up with. And as a DM, I don't want to do that either, which is perfectly valid. There is that kind of economy of, right, okay, fine, I don't have to keep keep an eye on all of this kind of stuff. It's really interesting. What do you think about the sense motives and the insight and stuff like that, Ross? Are there any skills that you like? Oh God, I wish they'd change that. I mean, I know I have that with a certain spell, but it's with the skills. Is there any that you just invite ambiguity and almost what's the word, like misuse, as it were?
You know what? I don't. Not in games that I run. I don't find any skill really hold on, let me just move my thing. I don't find any skill in my Cyberpunk game, because I don't play it, but I also, when I'm DMing it, I don't find a skill that I'm like, oh, I wish that wasn't in there. And for Pathfinder, maybe, I don't know really. There are ones that I just never use, but then that's the same with like, what your skill set is, what you're good at, and that's the thing is, you have one avenue. As Fulton, it's smashy, intimidation-y. I'm not going to be charisma based, like trying to woo someone or anything like that. So you are not using a load of skills anyway, but doesn't mean I don't like them in terms of having them there as a rule set. Do you know what I mean?
It's true, and actually, yeah. So Stu and Ashra and Chris are having a discussion about the, actually having skills that you're not very good at, even if they're not something you use, is still quite useful, because of course, the DM can refer to those, and it's good to be bad at things. Yes. You're not supposed to be an ace ninja who can absolutely do anything across the board. That's not how we are. And that's not how a character should be either. You should play to your strengths. And then sometimes you're forced to do a check and you're like, oh dear, I am no good at that. Which I think is something.
My favorite one is obviously perception. Like that is the core, the one that you always use.
You do.
And you always pour like as much as you can. Well, it used to be a skill, didn't it? But now it's like a separate.
It's its own thing, so you can't max it in the same way that you could.
Obviously, yeah.
Do you know what? It really is. And of all the things, there are these skills that, unfortunately, we're coming sort of quite tight to time. This is a very fertile topic. But perception, I remember when I first started playing D&D with Dan and the guys, it was one of the ones where you quickly go, wow, this is used a lot, because it's very useful for the player and the DM, I find. Because the number of times the DM can say, give me a perception check. Just to see if you notice that. Just to see if I can give this information. Just to pick up on that cue that someone's leaving or something like that. It just really. Do you find that's the case? Do you think it's the most useful skill?
It's why I love lore skills and knowledge skills and perception. As a GM, anything that lets you give information to the players is a good thing, because it's letting you give story to them, and it's letting we've all had it when we've been GMing games, that you go into an encounter and you have a page of stuff that you want the players to find out from this encounter, and they maybe find out half of it if you're lucky. So any chance that you get to sort of tell them that there is a secret door over there, that's a good thing, because that's them finding the game. So all those skills are really nice.
Yeah.
The one that
really good for that.
Perception's great for it, and the one that I actually really miss, I've got sort of two complaints about skills and one positive. So to kind of round off. So I want to finish on the positive one. We've got a
full-on complaint sandwich going on here. So look at
that. No, so the right. So one skill I love, which it's not a complaint. It's a skill that I love, which I wish was in 5th edition, because it's in 2nd edition Pathfinder, and in 1st edition it was profession. In 2nd edition, it's lore, and that's a skill that has a blank space that you can write a thing in. And I miss having a thing where and because 5e is tighter, and it's like you have 3 things that you're good at, just pick those. You don't have those extra points to it. I miss having that thing where I can kind of be like, I know about fishing, and this is a skill which will almost never come up. But maybe twice in the campaign there is a thing about fish, and I've got a thing I can roll on that means I know about fish, and the lore skill does that. And I just, it's not game breaking. It doesn't massively affect my enjoyment of it, but I do miss it when I play 5th edition. That I can't have that little thing that It came up when we had when I wanted to play a chef, and there was no skill we could roll on for me to cook everyone breakfast. So I had to roll on survival, which I don't have any points in, because why would you in a monk build have any points in survival? And so it's kind of like, and it became a joke that actually I'm a chef that can't cook. But it was like, oh, I just kind of wish there was a thing I could have done there to do that. The other complaint that I had about the one complaint that I will say about second edition, and it is my biggest bugbear with the system in general, skill feats. I think skill feats are kind of pointless, and I know there are second edition players who will be mad at me for that. I understand why they're there, to try and give you some extra little things on it, but honestly, if you forget to put your skill feats in when you level up, it will have very little effect on how you play the game. They are not that interesting. And I feel like everything you get in a game should be interesting. And when we made our level 10 characters for Smashfinder, putting the skill feats in was a chore, because it's like, let's find another. Okay, yeah, I've got that. And you could, if you mega specialize, you can do some really fun stuff, like the Intimidate build. The Intimidate tree is really fun, but yeah, they don't wow me, and I want things in these games to wow me. I want my new toys every level to be something that really excites me, and skill feats don't.
Well, there we go. Skill feats not getting the wow factor for the Dungeon Master. I think that's something that needs to be urgently looked at. But I mean, no, I joke. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I guess they try and put things in to add a bit of flavour, or to maybe appease people who feel that some of the options are removed from the edition. It goes on and on, doesn't it? And what about you, Russ? What are your sort of final thoughts about skills? And do you, obviously you like less skills, but do you think the system could be improved? Do you have anything like Dan where you think that something's a little bit naff?
No. I'm happy.
There we go.
I'm just happy, like, with,
he's happy, and he is happy. Look at his little face.
Yeah, I like both systems. I think they're both streamlined to get on with the role playing, and that's the core of it for me. More role playing is better for me. The more role playing you can get in a game without having to wade through like loads of rules and skills and stuff is better. Like, imagine if it was 35 or 40 skills. Like, it would just get in the way of actually playing the game, playing your character.
Exactly.
And it gives you a freedom of, like, you've got skills that you're not very good at, but it gives you a broad, like, it gives you the allowance to just create whatever character you want in that sense.
It is, yeah. And I think, that neatly links us back to the beginning. I know that Dan immediately reached for the Warhammer Fantasy Role-Playing Guide.
You can narrow it down as much as you like, Ross. How will you know how good you are at juggling if you don't have a specific juggling skill?
And this is it. And I think that it's a testament to how things have changed and moved on, that both of you, you're both very experienced DMs and also players as well. And that really, the system seems to be definitely on the right track and going there. A little bit of sort of lack of flavour from skill feats, but that's about it. Because that's the success of a system, that anyone, depending on your play style, depending on how you want to run a game, can come to these systems and find what they want and create the games that they want. I think that they're obviously, 5th edition, 2nd edition Pathfinder, some of the others we discussed as well. They're doing the right thing. We definitely have moved on from the days of juggling and plate spinning skills.
The days of juggling. Do we want to finish on like the most outrageous use of a skill that we've ever encountered? Can anyone think of something off the top of their head?
A little bit of bonus time, yeah. If one of you has the most outrageous use of a skill.
I'm just the one that springs to my mind off the top of my head, because one of the nice ones is acrobatics and athletics that let you pick whether you're strength or dex, that let you do physical stuff. So I was once running, quite recently, doing a Starfinder game where the group have to find their way through some dilapidated mines, and basically the encounter is everyone rolls a skill check, and you tell me how you are using that skill in order to help the group progress through these mines and find the signal at the top of it. And Colin said, I would like to use acrobatics. And I was like, how are you using acrobatics to help people through the mines? He was like, I just backflip my way through the mines and it inspires people to follow me. And I was just like, you.
Do you know what, actually, I did think of that example. I thought it was a really interesting mechanic in the path that we're playing at the moment. That it was basically like pick a skill and tell me how your character uses that to navigate these mines. And it was really interesting, the answers that came out. You know,
and you made like an algorithm to search, and
did.
my wife used Intimidate to just scream at everybody if they went the wrong way and hurry them up.
And I think, well, the first time she used it to scream down passages so she could echolocate, and the second time she just screamed at us. So, yeah, it was an effective use of Intimidate that we got there. But yeah, this has been really good. And interesting enough, Gwot says that he likes risky surgery. We liked risky surgery as well. That's really fun. Great. There are definitely some good skill feats in there that give some wonderful, sort of flavour. So yeah, they're just maybe could do a little. They could just do with a bit of oomph all round, perhaps. But and of course, Paul says I think sometimes a good game has less roles in it. Well, yeah. Exactly.
We know that.
We want to get on. We want to play the role-playing game. Whether you're a DM, a GM, or you're a player, you just want to get on and have some fun. And I think that's what the rules have striven towards, and what I hope you all end up doing. And with that, it brings us to a close of another Dangerous Wednesdays. It's been so much fun talking about this, and of course, I've been joined by the wonderful Ross Harmston.
Goodbye, everybody.
There we go. I'm seriously worried about his future career plans, but hey, we all do a bit of that in our lives.
Obviously.
And it's goodbye from Dan.
Bye, everybody. I'm off to put away all of these books and write a horrible combat encounter for our next record.
Ooh. And of course, it's goodbye from me, James Foxy Lockhart, wishing you a very happy Wednesday. And remember, of course, stay dangerous. All right, guys. See ya.
Stay Wednesday.
Stay Wednesdays.